So here we are just checking on this aquarium. All the fish look very healthy and happy. They're all running around and chasing each other around and doing everything they're meant to do. In general, they're not too fat or too thin. They're all very peckish, running around looking very eager to eat. There's some platies that are probably not too far off dropping some babies. And with the platies, like that guy there, they'll drop live birth babies. So what we've done is put a little nursery up in the top here. And the idea with that is we just attach it around the cords in the back, just to secure it in the corner here. And then the plan, which often works, is when she releases the babies, she'll often release them where she thinks they might be safe. And like a little bunch of fake plants up in the back corner is often just enough cover to give the babies somewhere to hide, because the babies tend to be on the surface, and if there's no cover on the surface, then they just tend to be vulnerable to getting eaten, particularly by a big hungry mouth like that. This fish does appear to have grown since last week, like the other week that I was here, as far as I think. So these guys here are pretty much ready to drop. Indoors in Sydney, platies don't really need heaters, particularly if they're put in the warmer months. Then we've got some mountain clouds. Mountain clouds are a real favourite of mine because they're just a really happy, easy, busy fish. I really enjoy watching mountain clouds. I actually keep them myself in my nature tank outside. This tank's also got some Danios, which are another just fabulous, active, easy little fish. Don't really need heaters. We've got a few koi buzzing around. The koi are definitely a concern just because of how big and fast they grow. So we just need to be aware that in any sort of indoor aquarium environment like this one, the koi are going to have a shelf life because eventually they will get too big. And we've also got some fancy goldfish. Now, the thing that we just have to be aware of with fancy goldfish, and the thing that we've sort of learnt the hard way in this tank, is that fancy goldfish are full of recessive genes. So they just tend to be prone to various issues, and their immune systems just don't tend to be really strong. Another fish that we've got buzzing around in here is the peppered catfish. And peppered catfish are just an awesome scavenger. Now this tank's getting a fair bit of algae, which we've recently just put a nice big canister filter on it. So over a long period of time, I would expect the canister filter to have a positive effect on the algae. But with this amount of fish buzzing around in the tank, then I am expecting algae. What we can do is just do a blackout. So if we don't want the algae, one option we could do is just pretty much have the light out for a couple of weeks, and that would starve the algae of light, particularly if there's not too much ambient light. It's one thing that we can do. Another thing that we can do, considering this is an indoor aquarium, is we could consider putting some bristlenose catfish in there. Now, because it's summer now, going into summer, they're going to be fine. But if we left the bristlenose in as we head towards winter, then if this house gets really cold, then the bristlenose would be vulnerable. If we did really worry about the bristlenose as it gets colder, then we could consider putting a little heater in. It only costs about $30 for a tank like this. And then the fish in the tank would then think it's summer all year. So the fish in here would love you because they just get to be in summer all year. Most fish thrive in summer and they survive in winter. So they would definitely appreciate the heater if that decision was made. There is another catfish that you could consider as well, because algae, if you have catfish, becomes a commodity because the catfish actually love eating the algae. So these ones with the barbels are scavenging catfish, but you can also get the suckermouth catfish, and the suckermouth catfish actually eat the algae. So you can actually have an environment where the algae becomes a commodity because your fish actually like to eat it. So that's something that could be considered. So there is also one called a sucking cat. Now a sucking cat would be a little bit of a gamble in this tank because a sucking cat can sometimes suck on the side of the goldfish, which may irritate them. So that would be a risk. If you only had the koi and these other temperate fish, you could probably chuck a sucking cat in here quite comfortably. They don't really need the heaters. They're not as good for the algae as the bristlenose, but they are pretty good and they are pretty cool fish, unless you get a psycho one, which you can actually get ones that are quite aggressive. Most of them are fine, but it's not unusual just to get one that you sort of rather give back. So that's just something you need to keep an eye on. But all in all, this is a very busy, very active tank. So I would be pretty hesitant to put any more fish in this tank unless they were here to do a specific job, such as eating algae. So I'm a massive fan of what we call biological controls. So putting in something like a bristlenose catfish in here would literally be a biological control, because it would be using other fish to help keep the tank cleaner, which is something that I very, very much enjoy. So now I'm just going to get the water tested. Now, if you're going to add temperate water fish to an aquarium like this one, let's use the example of bristlenose. If we put them in summer, it's quite usual, particularly if they're in a nice temperate condition house, that they'd be fine through winter. But if you go buying a temperate water fish like a bristlenose in winter, that would be a very bad idea, because that would likely get shocked. But if they actually can acclimatize to slightly colder temperature as the winter comes in, then they can be okay. So the best time to add any of these temperate water fish is while the water is warmer. And then once again, if you have a thermometer, you can just keep an eye on the temperature. And if you're finding the temperature regularly under 20 degrees, then you may consider just whacking a heater in, which you would not need in summer, because the heater is actually thermostated. So it will only turn on while the temperature is cold. When the temperature is warm, they don't turn on. Now, one thing I highly advise doing for your fish is just rearranging stuff or just putting new stuff in, because I've just put this little nursery in up here that we're hoping that the platy babies might go in. And it's really great watching the fish interact with anything new that's in the tank. Like, you'll very clearly see when there's something new in the tank, how the fish get really curious and come up and spin and check it out, swim around it, because that little fish tank is the fish's world. So if you rearrange stuff, change stuff around, you're really changing their world. And I think it really is a lot more interesting for the fish. If you just have the same setup forever, then that's their experience of life. If every few months you swap it all around and change it, then you're completely changing the environment that the fish have. And therefore, it's more interesting for you to watch how the fish interact, but more than anything else, it's more interesting for the fish. And you can see by their reaction that they're quite interested in anything that you change in their little world. So I've tested the water now. The pH is nice and alkaline, which is standard for Sydney. There's basically no ammonia. There's basically no nitrite. There's basically no nitrate. The KH is 7, which I'm quite happy with. And the GH is 16, which I'm happy with. It's on the high side, but I'm happy with. So I'm very happy with all of those levels. So the water is testing well. All the fish look very well. We did lose a little mountain cloud and a goldfish over the last couple of weeks, which we don't have a direct reason for, but there is a lot of fish in this tank, so population could be a thing. And the filter is really just settling in, because the filter was only recently put on the tank. And when fish die from overpopulation, they're not really dying from something that you can test. It's more things like concentrations of pheromones and phenols and things that build up in the water. And we really can't test for that. It's just something that we know from experience, that when you have too many fish, then some of them die. The things that you can do to decrease pheromones and phenols is more regular water changes, having better filters, And then there is media like polyfilter that you could consider putting in the filter, and that will help to remove pheromones and phenols and so forth. So all these things help, but they are definitely not the actual solution. The solution is just don't have too many fish. Also, you might notice the water's just a little bit cloudy. So that isn't necessarily an issue. It can be an indication of what's called Gilvan tint, which just means there's been a lot of biological activity in this tank, which there certainly has been due to the amount of fish and the fact we put a new filter on it. And that over time may clear up. Polyfilter is another way of helping to reduce organics and reduce Gilvan tint, which would help to clear the water a little bit as well. And then if we did put a little bit of activated carbon, such as biochemsorb in the filter, then that would clear up the water like crystal clear. So now I've given the glass a once over with this to give the glass a bit of a clean. Having a razor blade's the best thing for getting in the corners and getting it all nice and clean. And then I've taken the filters apart and I've washed them in water from the tank, and I've used a gravel cleaner to clean the gravel, and I've removed about a quarter of the water. Now I'm just going to check the canister. Because it was only put in last week, I'm not expecting it to be dirty. That's a hell of a big filter for this tank. But it's really important that the filters are cleaned in water from the fish tank, not water from the tap. Hey buddy. When you're cleaning your fish tank, never forget to clean the lids, because it's quite often that I'll see a nice clean tank, but the lids are quite green, and that means the light shines through the green and makes the water look green. So nice clean lids are important. And it's really good to have a little tray underneath your canister filter, just because every time you open these taps, just a tiny little bit of water is going to come out. So it's nice just to be able to collect it in a little tray. So putting a drip tray under your filter is a good idea. Just checked on this filter and it was predictably clean. So what I'm doing now is just turning these taps on, because we shut the taps whenever we clean the filter. And this one's got a priming mechanism. So providing that the inlet is in the water, then what I can do is just pump on this. And pumping on that is going to prime the filter and shoot water through it. And what that's aiming to do is suck out the air bubbles, because if there's an air bubble in the top of this unit, the filter actually won't work. So what this primer will do is pump manually so the air bubbles come out, and then when I plug the filter in, it'll start working. Actually the power's not on right now, but when I do that, that'll actually... So now I'm just refilling the water. I'm making sure that we're putting a little bit of water ager in all of the water, because what the water ager will do is remove any chlorines, chloromones and so forth. So just you need tiny little bits, all you need of that. Now the KH and GH of this tank is pretty good, so I don't really need to add these two because I've tested them. If I was concerned about either of these two levels, I would definitely want to increase KH and GH. But because I've done all the tests on this particular tank, I know that I don't need to add them, so I'm not going to add them today. Now the other thing that just doesn't hurt, now so what Easy Life is a blend of minerals that affect the molecular structure of the water and gives the water what's called a type positive charge. Oh, that's not so easy to open. So the idea with this stuff, just give it a good shake, and you just want to tip it in so the water's a bit cloudy, and then that will basically give the water a type positive charge. So it'll hold in solution things that should be in solution and drop out of solution things that shouldn't be in solution. So just a good thing to add. Helps immune systems, helps water clarity, and various stuff like that. So when you're resetting up and hang-on filter, it's really important that you fill up the hang-on filter with water before you turn it on. So this tank has an example of all the different sorts of filters you can get. It's got a canister filter, which are the best. It's got an internal filter, which is this one. And it's also got an external hang-on filter, which is this one. So this is a very filtered tank now. So what I've done is just gone and put a background on the back of this tank. And a background is really just a lovely way of finishing off the tank. It sort of, so you can't see the cords and so forth from the back filters and so forth. And changing the background every now and then is a good little thing that you can do just to mix up what's going on. But this tank definitely looks really good now after a bit of a clean and after a nice new backdrop. All good.